Blurry photos are one of the most common and one of the most annoying problems in photography. So in this video, I want to teach you a few techniques for how to avoid taking blurry photos, because you can't really fix a blurry photo once you've taken it. No amount of editing is really going to fix a truly blurred photo. One of the first things you've got to think about is how clean is your lens. If you're taking a photo with a dirty lens, it's got fingerprints on it or other grime, you're not going to get a good, clear, sharp photo. So make sure that your lenses are clean. It's really easy to get grime and fingerprints on your mobile phone lens, so it really does pay to check it every now and again to make sure that it's nice and clean. One of the other main problems, especially if you're taking photos with a camera, is poor focusing. Autofocus on modern cameras is absolutely fantastic, but you've still got to know how to manage it well. You've got to know the differences between using multi-point autofocus or single-point autofocus, because sometimes they're going to give you a different kind of response, and you might find that your camera doesn't always focus where you want it to. This is because your camera doesn't know what your subject is. It doesn't know what the main part of your composition is. So it's good to be able to control it when you need to. So when you're setting up to take a photograph, look at your composition and decide whereabouts you want to focus, and make sure that your camera is focused on that point. If you're using multi-point autofocus and your camera is not focusing where you want it to, you'll need to switch over to single point focus, or if your camera's got a touchscreen monitor, touch the monitor where you want your camera to focus. So with the subjects I've chosen to photograph today, I've got one of them that's pointing straight at the camera. It's flat on to the camera, so it's parallel with the sensor plane. That whole piece is going to be in focus. It's going to be sharp. The one next to it, I've got it at an angle so that it's facing, some of it is closer to the camera, some of it's further away from the camera. Depending on where I focus on the subject, some of it will be in focus, some of it may not be in focus, because it's different distances from my camera's sensor. So if your subject is mainly parallel to your camera, it's much easier to get it in focus than it is if it's angled so that some of it's further away from your camera than other points of your subject. And along with focusing, you've got to think about the depth of field. This is how much of your composition is going to be in focus. Mostly this is governed by your aperture setting and the distance you are from your subject, so how close you are to your subject. So the wider aperture you use, the less amount of depth of field you'll get, and the closer you are focusing to your subject, so if you're really close up to your subject, the less depth of field you're going to get at any given aperture number. So if you want a shallow depth of field, if you don't want much in focus, you've got to be really precise with the point that you're focusing on. And if you're focusing on anything with eyes, always make sure to focus on the eyes, because this is the most important part to have in focus. And if you've got a subject that's not parallel to the camera, think about what part of your subject is most important. Do you want the front part of it in focus, or the middle, or the back? And you'll want to make sure that your autofocus point is set to the right part of your main subject to get it in focus. And anytime you've got movement in a subject, you've got to consider this, because motion blur is also another problem. It's different than focus blur, and it involves how fast your subject is moving in relation to how fast your shutter speed is. So if you've got a slow shutter speed and a fast moving subject, it's going to blur. So with a faster moving subject, you need to use a faster shutter speed to get it to look sharp. So for that, I've used 1,000th of a second. It's not moving particularly quickly, and I've managed to freeze the action. So now my subject's moving a lot faster. So I've photographed that at various shutter speeds, and I've got down to 1/125th of a second, which is usually fast enough for a static subject. So this one that's not moving is nice and sharp, but the fan that is moving is really blurred. Then at 2/50th of a second it's blurred, even 500th of a second it's blurred. and it looks a little bit blurred at 1,000th of a second when it's moving this fast. So in order to really freeze a fast-moving subject, you need a much faster shutter speed than you do for a subject that's not moving. And the other problem that can occur using a slow shutter speed is camera movement. If your camera moves even slightly while the shutter is open, when you're using a slow shutter speed, the whole of your subject will blur. So I'll shut my aperture down even further, and I'll slow my shutter speed down to 1/15th of a second. So at a 1/15th of a second, maybe even a 1/30th of a second, I'm not able to handhold my camera steadily enough to get a static subject appearing nice and sharp. There's a little bit of camera movement, so then the whole image is blurred because of this. And the best way to fix this problem is to put your camera on a tripod so that it won't move. This is not always convenient. I avoid using a tripod unless I have to use one. But if I need to use one, I use one because at a slow shutter speed and I'm hand holding, I know that I won't be able to hold my camera steady enough. This is an older model camera. It doesn't have image stabilization. If your camera and lenses have good image stabilization, you'll find that you'll be able to hand hold your camera down probably a lot slower than a 30th or a 15th of a second. So they're the main reasons you'll get blurry photos. Having dust or grime on your lens, having poor focus or a depth of field that's too shallow for your subject, or having a shutter speed that's too slow for a moving subject, or too slow for you to be able to handhold your camera steadily. There are a few other reasons, and I've gone into these in more depth in the article on my website. I'll put a link in the description of this video so you can check that out if you're still getting problems after watching this. If you've enjoyed this video, please click that like button, and if you're new to our channel, please click the subscribe button and the bell icon so you can stay up to date when we release new videos.